Hi everybody, we're here to talk about how to build doctrines. It's kind of a guided tour on the process of building doctrines, the whys and the hows of it. We've got a lot of content to cover, and we're going to talk kind of quickly. So if you want to download the PowerPoint and some notes that we have, you can go to the link there, and that'll also be on the last slide if you want to write that down so you can grab the PowerPoint and those notes that we've got. So getting right into it. Who we are and what we do. My name is Sparre. I'm the Mainline Selects Atari. I've been playing Eve since 2005, and I started FCing almost immediately. Beginning with Lowsec as an anti-pirate, I moved to Null, working with Lord Maldor before Rooks and Kings. I eventually moved on to FC for Hard Knocks when they were invaded back in 2012, and now I've moved back to working in Lowsec and Nullsec. I've been crafting doctrines and individual shipments basically since I started FCing, though not always with success.
I'm Elise Randolph. I'm from Pandemic Legion. I've been playing the game since 2005-ish, 2004. A few breaks here and there. Most of that time I've been with Pandemic Legion. You can see a bunch of them out here. They've also got some flags too. In terms of doctrine stuff, I've done a lot of Alliance Tournament things, which is kind of a little bit of doctrines, tiny doctrines. And also some doctrines with PL. Some of our, refining ones coming up with ideas, shooting ideas down, telling people they're bad, and then, being told, or trying them, and then finding out that they're actually super, super good. Like Tengus, we were like, Tengus, dumb. Turned out they were pretty good. But yeah, that's me. I've been playing for a long time, and we'll get into it a little bit.
So speaking of doctrines, what are they? Doctrine is the overall strategy of the fleet, determining what ships are flown in it and how they're flown. Many ways you can think about a doctrine as a fitting for your fleet, like you fit modules to your ship. You need tackle, or razzos for a fleet, or disruptors for your ship. You need tank, maybe scimitars or large shield extenders, and utility, you need Sleipners or fleet for your fleet, or damps for your ship. It's not a one-to-one match, but it works pretty well. Yeah. Having a cohesive doctrine is incredibly important for a successful fleet. It lets the FC knows what engageable, what the fleet can do, and where it needs to be positioned. So you need a cohesive fit on your ships, you need a solid doctrine for your fleet.
Yeah, and Debes had a pretty good analogy. It's essentially a ship fitting for people. Like, you could go into a ship hangar, right-click, throw everything onto your ship, and just go out and fly a garbage ship. You might get lucky, you might kill something. Same is true if you're doing a doctrine. You just have a bunch of people that pick up ships, whatever they want to fly. You might get lucky, you might kill something, but if someone's actually prepared for it, and they have an actual cohesive doctrine, no matter how good or bad they are, they have a much better chance of winning than you do. So it's pretty important.
So we're going to go over the requirements to make a doctrine and the types of doctrines next. So having a solid doctrine lets you determine very easily what's engageable by knowing your DPS, what you can tank, and your support abilities without needing every individual person in your fleet to tell you, which they may not actually know. It informs you of how to engage once you've determined that you can. Being able to work the entire fleet at one range and immediately engage is incredibly more effective than having everyone either warp themselves at different ranges or warp at one range, then have everybody break out, and maybe the blaster ships move in and they don't do any damage for 30 seconds or a minute while they're moving into it. And then it also gives new members a solid goal to train towards. And this is sort of overlooked when you're thinking about doctrines in general, but having especially new players to the game or new members to your corp have a goal to train to is important. In Eve, there are no goals besides the one you set for yourself. So being able to provide that goal to everyone and have them be able to know what to do and how to get there really helps with engagement and retention for both new players to the game and just new players to your corp in general.
When you go into design a doctrine, there's basically two paths you can take right at the very start. Do you want to be innovative, or do you want to be reactionary? Most of the doctrines that are designed are reactionary. You're reacting to something that your opponent has, or some fleet that they have. We have a scenario that you need to react to, like your citadel got reinforced, and the bad guys are flying battleships. You want to react to that. That's, like I was saying, 80 to 90% of what the doctrines are, and the other 10% are innovative. It's when you're trying to put it bluntly, when you're trying to break the game and do something that puts people in a reactionary position. That gives you a huge advantage when you're doing that, because A, people might not know how to react, It might take them 10, 15 fights to give it a shot, and in that time, you just slam all over people and rankle them really hard. And it's great. It is really good. Some of the innovative types, these seem really easy right now, but in EVE's history, they weren't always that easy and straightforward. Arma hacks, like signature tanking, that entire concept, people thought that was ridiculous. They're like, oh, how are these zealots doing anything? Why are my guns not hitting them? Like, they just didn't understand it. It took a very long time for people to adapt to that. Even going forward with drone assigned doctrines a few years ago. No one really thought about doing that. Literally, the history behind it is RFC at the time, Shadu, was so mad that people weren't following primaries. He said, guys, theory crafters, I need something so easy that all of you idiots can do it. Just assign me your drones, and we'll take it from there. And that was the drone assigned doctrine. That was popular for like 2 years. And yeah, so the goal, break the game for innovative ones. It's what the theory crafters dream about. I've talked to them. They do actually dream about this. They're weirdos. But, you know, to each their own. I've also dreamed about this. It feels bad.
So going over the types of doctrines, there's some main sort of divisions that you can use to describe your types of doctrines, and they sort of fall into these 4 categories, more or less. You've got shield versus armor, skirmish versus tank, which has some important differences from just being a repeat of shield versus armor, ship sizes, and then engagement ranges. And we'll go into each one of those a little bit.
All right, what are the first decisions you make? One of the first 2 decisions, I'd say, between skirmish and tank and shield and armor is shield and armor. You're like, do you want to take shield ships or do you want to take armor ships? Pretty simple, but each one is very, very different. You guys played EVE, you know basically everything out there, you know what the ships are, you know the differences, so we won't go into it in too much detail. But the big thing is armored doctrines are slow for like the more drawn out fights, where you just want to hold around a position, and you have a lot of utility mid slots. So you can just put a lot of EVOR in there, put a lot of tackle in there. You know, when you don't have that many numbers, armor is generally the way to go because you get so much utility out of it. Meanwhile, shield, you have those low slots freed up, so that's why a lot of times you see them in skirmish doctrines, though not exclusively, and you can put more damage in there. So at the expense of utility, you have speed, maneuverability, and damage.
So for skirmish versus tank, again, it seems at first glance to just be a rehash of shield versus armor, but it's really not. Armor hacks are armor tanked skirmish ships, and something like blaster rucks are shield tanked tank ships. The big difference here is the ability of a different type of doctrine to survive having parts of it removed. Skirmish doctrines tend to be very, very fragile. They'll have some key linchpin ships, like tackle or something that provides links, that without that, the entire doctrine falls apart. Whereas tanky doctrines tend to be able to absorb more damage. They can lose a few ships here and there, and they still keep on keeping on because there's less variety there. There's a few types. You might have only DPS and Guardians and have your DPS double as as tackle because they've got those spare mid slots. But with the skirmish, you can't do that. So the other interesting point here is that alpha doctrines and sniper doctrines are skirmish doctrines, and they fall into that same category. Because once you lose the number of ships that you need to alpha the enemy off the field, the entire doctrine falls apart. You can no longer accomplish anything because you don't have any DPS and you are relying entirely on alpha. So skirmish tends to be a little bit more fragile than the tanking doctrines.
Yeah, they're very much a finesse doctrine. Moving on, you have the ship size spectrum. It's essentially what size of the ships that are you going to take. Each class has its drawbacks and something it excels at and stuff that it's kind of bad at. Frigates and destroyers, they're great when you want to go fast, roam around low set for a few people. You don't need a lot of logistics. They are kind of hard because we don't have that much wiggle room. People think frigates are the easiest, but they're kind of not really. But yeah, it's easy when you want to go somewhere, roam around, go somewhere quick. You wouldn't want to take a battleship to start roaming around low set. It takes forever to do that. And you wouldn't really want to take frigates to go and fight a null-sec battle unless you're doing Atosis or stuff like that. You need to move fast. Moving up is my favorite area. It's cruisers and battle cruisers. This is where you're more durable than the frigates and destroyers by a huge margin. This is where you can start to fight fleet battles. This is where logistic ships become very important. Not to say it's not important in frigates, it is. or it can be, but this is where you kind of, they really do start to shine. And you can do it without support if you have to, but they work better with support. And then going up to battleships / capitals, this is where logistics is required, support is required. But the trade-off is you get a lot more EHP, you got a lot more damage, you get a lot more range, you just have everything is a tool that can open up for you. But you are very, very slow, and it's generally good for like battles where you know there's going to be just an area where you're going to have to move like 3 or 4 systems and that's it.
So Archtype Synergy is combining these different bits into a cohesive whole, and specifically having multiple fleets that work together very well. One of the early examples of this is AHAX plus battleships, and Solar pioneered this, where the battleships sat and held an objective, and then the armor hacks would run around and either force the enemy to run away entirely or force them to run into the battleships, giving the battleships the kills and allowing that to be sort of a combined doctrine there. You could do something else like PL and NC do with Tech 3 cruisers and capitals, where it's the same sort of idea. The capitals hold the field, or the Tech 3 gets the tackle on it, and then the capitals come in to drop the hammer. And then you've got the chaotic method, where there's battle cruisers of virtually any type, and ECM. Just make the enemy unable to do anything, and your battle cruisers will eventually win.
It's the worst feeling in the world to get jammed by a bunch of great new conscripts.
But
the worst.
This causes problems, because now you have 2 different fleets that need to engage at 2 different ranges, or more than 2 fleets potentially that engage at multiple ranges, maybe even with different tank methods. So you need to have coordination between FCs, because you're almost certainly going to have multiple FCs running multiple fleets, coordinating all those things, especially when you're doing something like Tech 3 cruisers plus capitals. You have a capital FC, maybe multiple capital FCs, and you've got a Tech 3 cruiser FC, and there has to be coordination there. So this is a very powerful tactic, but it's also very hard to get right and very easy to screw up.
Yeah, you see a lot of people when they're not very comfortable with running many fleets at once, just say, oh, it looks great on paper, it seems easy, then there's no coordination there and everything just goes up in a ball of fire. The power creep doesn't get pushed that hard indeed, but the complexity creep certainly does.
So what we're going to do now is a sort of guided tour, where we're going to take a scenario and bring you through how Elise and I would design 2 doctrines and what the reasoning is behind that to do it. It's a low-sec POCA defense with no capitals and no third party, which I know sounds crazy, but it does happen. I have proof and I can provide it. The attackers are going to be a shield skirmish corps with a small, high skill point group, and then the defenders are an armor battleship corps with a large but lower skill point group.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be role-playing the
13 of them. This gives decent maneuverability, at least better than the armor battleships I expect to face, as well as enough range to at least hopefully be fighting in fall-off. And to keep them going, they're going to have 2 scimitars. The general goal is that they don't get shot at much, but I expect that I'll probably be in fall-off at least a little bit, so I have to be able to repair that damage, or eventually I just get forced off over time with no recourse. And then we need to be able to engage the enemy. So I'm going to have 1 webbing rapier. That's my anti-tackle as well as my ability to hold down the enemy. It has a faction web and a faction point on it to give it a little bit more range and to be able to hold that enemy either at bay or prevent them from getting back. And the reason they would need to get back is because I've got 3 microtron field generator Maguses. Now, the Magus is not necessarily thought of as a shield tank, but I don't have much tackle. I need to have those mid slots to have tackle in them, and so I just had to pick what I could go with there. And then finally, I've got 1 Link Claymore to give my team the most power possible, given that I'm fighting outnumbered, I'm fighting at range. I need to be able to tank and to, especially with that webbing rapier, have as much tackle range as possible. So you can see this as the ship fitting, right? I've got my damage, I've got my tank, I've got my tackle, I've got my utility. I've now made a ship fit for my fleet.
All right, and I'll be role-playing the defenders. Much like on Tranquility, I'll be in charge of a very large group with very little PvP experience. Usually relies on allies and stuff to keep us propped up. But you know, we're really motivated for this one. We just put this POCO down. We want it. We want to show these guys that we are the boss. So as I'm designing this, knowing my audience of my group, I'm going to pull up the Tech 1 battleship. It's pretty good. I'm going to sit around the Poco, make them come to me. It's what I have to defend. I know if they want to get rid of it and kill it, they have to come in close. I know everyone is going to be able to fly Dominix in my group because they're ratted VNIs. So I'm like, all right, let's get some Dominix after that. And of course, I'm going to be operating on the assumption that since my guys are pretty new, they're not going to be perfect at the game. They're not going to be able to apply everything. Drone ship's kind of easy when it comes to that. And I'm going to, make sure there's enough backup so when they do make a mistake, the whole thing doesn't fall apart, because that would be bad. And I know that those mistakes are going to happen. All right, so we've got, with my 50 to 60 people, so maybe a little bit more, depending on who shows up. See if I can morale speech them up. I'm going to get about 20 to 25 Dominixes. It's pretty low in the DPS, but I want to make sure that I have something for everybody, and I know that not everyone's going to be able to fly into Dominix. So I'm going to say 20 to 25 Dominixes. And for my reps, this is where I do a lot of backup. I've got 6 to 8 augurs and 2 guardians. I take the guardians because I know there's always going to be some people in my fleet that are like, oh, I'm great at logistics, I love it, it's my favorite role in all the games I play. I want to fly a better ship than a shitty augur. So they're going to take a guardian. I'm not going to force everybody in the guardian. I know my group, they can't all fly slaved out guardians and stuff like that. So just 2 guardians is what I'm going to plan for with 6 to 8 augurs. It's a lot of extra logistics. I hate doing this generally, but I know my group, half those reps are probably not going to land. People are going to broadcast just randomly or forget their broadcast. So, making some moves for people that make mistakes. And prophecies, they synergize very well with the Debes. They provide links, which help my fleet out immensely. They're not damnations, because they're way too expensive for my group. It's got target painters and, some mid-slots in that. For everyone else, they can fly Celestises. It's very easy to get into a Celestis. You can be an alpha flight pilot in a Celestis and be very useful. I want people to come in close to me, and I want to punish people that try and kite and stay at range. So the Celestis works. It's very easy for people who have never really done PvP, or who have like 1 or 2 tries at it, and they're not sure if they like it yet or not. Following on that line, I also have some molluses. Because for people that don't even want to spend 5 million ISK or 10 million ISK on a SRB Celestis, they can just put 1 million down and fly Mollusk. They're very effective, makes the enemy have to kill something, and in that time, maybe I can, wrestle control over the field, or, maybe they'll be happy that they killed 20 of my Tech 1 cruisers, and I get to save the objective, and that's a win for everybody. For the people that can't fly Dominixes, I say, hey, you can fly Vexer. You can do stuff in it, it's a very tanky platform, you'll probably die, but there's synergy in there. And then for the people that just like to zerg around and be crazy, I've got Atrons. They're really fast, and I really don't care how many I have. I know they're very important, but people sometimes are like, oh, I don't feel like flying a Mollusk. It seems like I'm not doing anything. In the Atron, you feel like you're doing something. You're just zerging straight at the enemy and dying sometimes, but it's great. And I've been zerged at by many brave Atrons in my life. And they eventually killed me, like, I killed 20 of you, and then the 21st kills me. So, and then of course, I have a game plan for a Drake, especially after the Alliance tournament. I know someone's always going to try and bring a Drake now, or maybe Drake. They're going to be convinced that they're great. This is my Dominix. You can see the fit on, this is just the game fit, the simulation. Afterburner, lots of tank, some damage mods in there too, because I don't want to be all tank. Nukes for whenever bad guys come in. It's a pretty versatile ship. I like it. And this is kind of the main part of the Doctrine, right? It's the Augur, which is actually very, very tanky for a Tech 1 cruiser. Provides a lot of reps. And the Celestis, it's got a lot of damps. If I know my opponent's going to be in a serve, one of these Celestis, as long as he's paying attention, he can probably get one of them served out. Knock him out of the fight or force him to come in. So those are pretty much what my Doctrine's going to do, and we're not going to get into exactly how it goes.
Right, but instead we're going to go over what we can learn from these Doctrines. How do we use these Doctrines to know how to engage and what to engage? How much DPS can we tank, and how much do we do? Those Cerberus has put out roughly 6,000, so I know that I need to have removed in some way, either through damage otherwise or probably through using those micro jump field generators to remove either a battleship from the reps because they can rep more than I can put out, or I remove the reps away and I take them out, something like that. But I can tell, because I know how much damage I do and I can roughly guess how much they do, that I have to do something before I can engage. Just doing damage won't do it. I have to do something else.
Yeah, because we designed our doctrines and we, as FCs, we kind of design doctrines. We both know, because of this, what our victory conditions are and what our loss conditions are, and we should start, cutting off. If, for example, his group gets like all of my guardians off or all of my augurs off, I'm going to have to say, well, I'm not losing now, but I'll lose soon, so let me hit and run.
Yep. And knowing how to build a doctrine, going through the work of trying to figure out how your doctrine's going to work, what you're going to do, you're going to come across every other thing in the game, and you're going to find out what the enemy fleet can do. You can sort of guess, hey, I know how much augurs rep, I know how much guardians rep, I can guess what their rep level is, what they're going to do. Once the drones come out of the Dominixes, whatever drones they are, probably sentries, I can more or less instantly know, okay, I think that's about how much DPS they're going to do. I now know how many Dominixes I have to take down for my Cerberuses to go in with their scimitars and just brawl it out. The answer's a lot, by the way. Then the other questions are, what range do we engage at? What are the linchpins? What's primary? All these things are informed by the doctrines and by knowing how your doctrine works and knowing how enemy doctrines work. So for Elise, he definitely needs to take out that rapier, otherwise his Atrons are pretty much all going to die miserable deaths 40 kilometers away from me. For me, I have to take out those Celestises, otherwise my Cerberuses will never be able to do damage, or at least not outside of newt range, at which point they die anyways. So we know what linchpins are, we know what to call primary, and we know what we have to do in order to actually win the fight.
All right, and one of the most important things is when you're designing these doctrines, we did a very simplistic presentation of it. It is incredibly complex. It is the most complex aspect of the PvP side of the game. And there are traps that people fall into that I've seen a lot. I mean, I fall into it myself. I've seen other people do it. I've seen other groups and blocks do it. The biggest mistake is assuming what Piper or EFT says is exactly what's going to happen. Like, oh, I've got 120,000 hit points and blah, 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 a bunch of numbers. Assuming that everything's going to apply all the time and your people are going to make no mistakes is a huge pitfall. I know we had one guy who was notorious for saying, well, when someone's getting shot, they have to overload exactly the reps at the exact right time. They could live for exactly 6 minutes or something. We're like, no, these people, mistakes get made. And so that's one of the biggest mistakes you can do. Another huge mistake is to not take the right mix or not care what type of synergy you're taking with your fleet. If you say, oh, my doctrine is Dominixes and augurs, I'm going to take all Dominixes and 3 augurs, you're going to die. Or if I take all augurs and no Dominixes, well, then I'm not going to die, but I'm not going to kill anything, and stuff like that. As that gets into a more complex doctrine, when you change that ratio, it completely changes what you can do. And that's kind of one of the best feelings when you're saying, oh, I have this broad doctrine. Just make tiny little changes and it acts as almost a new doctrine in and of itself. Another trap is assuming that everything's going to apply perfectly, very similar to the previous one. If EFT or Piper says, hey, I do 700 damage, why is this guy not dying? He's only in a frigate. Well, maybe my target painter guy isn't target painting. And, oh, that's how tracking works. Oops, forgot. Another trap is, getting a little bit too cocky. If you're a theory crafter and you're like, oh, I know what these guys are doing. I know what those Serbs are going to do. When I fly my Serbs, I have heavy missiles, and I can stay at range. And then all of a sudden, you see these rapid heavy Serbs coming in there, just popping on my frigates at 70 kilometers. I'm like, oh no, they're doing the wrong thing. One of the most excruciating feelings in EVE is when someone does something wrong, but it works, and you're sitting there like, well, why'd they do that? It's dumb what they did, and here I am with my nose bloody.
So very quickly, as I believe we're running out of time, in conclusion, doctrines give you information about your fleet and the enemy fleet. By building those doctrines, you learn how different doctrines are built, and you can learn things about the enemy fleet and make at least educated guesses about what they're doing and how they're doing and what you need to do to counter that. Cohesive doctrines are important, and just very quickly, some doctrine is better than no doctrine. Having a doctrine allows you to give your people something to train to, but having a doctrine, getting at least all of your fleet into shield ships so that you can use the same logistics to keep everybody up, that's great. At least you've got that. Or at least everybody's doing brawling. Maybe they've mixed tanks, maybe they've got local tanks, but at least they're all brawling. You can all warp in at the same range and you can do something. And this also ties into building a plan for your fleet to get to the point of being able to be all in the same ship at the same time with the same fits. So bringing everybody together and moving in that direction is incredibly important, just like having those vectors in fleet for the people who couldn't fly Dominixes. So you get that, and they still train drone skills. They'll have heavy drones, they can do sentries, they can do all those things, they can do that.
Yeah, it is very important just to always have something, you know. No one starts off being the best at something. No group starts off at being the best. But if you make these small incremental changes and you learn from them and you just apply the principles at a very small scale and then grow from that, eventually you'll have these very complex doctrines, and maybe you'll have a doctrine that nobody can beat. Maybe you'll just be the next Black Horizon or something like that, and the next Armor Hack or the next Slow Cat. Please don't be the next Slow Cat. But yeah.
So we don't have the fits up quite yet. We'll have them up in the next couple of days, but if you want to get the PowerPoint for all the notes that we have, and sometime by the end of the week we'll have the fits up there that we made for the different fleet documents. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, if you have any questions, again, we're running out of time because the closing ceremony is coming, but you can either poke either of us in game or just grab us as we're walking around. It's the easiest way to do it. And
I'll be at the movie, so you can grab me there too.
Yeah, we're both huge nerds, so we love talking about it, so don't feel like you're invading privacy or something like that. That's why we're all here, to talk about nerdy spaceships.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.